Welcome to the ACI-LAC and Munich Airport International webinar on how successfully decarbonize an airport. In today's webinar, we have the pleasure to count with our speaker, Michael Obermeyer, Sustainability Consultant at Munich Airport International. And before we start, we would like to share with you that as usual, we have simultaneous interpretation. You can select Spanish or English in the globe icon in the Zoom menu. Besides, if you don't want to hear the original audio, please click on mute original audio. As we recall from other webinars, the chat function is disabled, and in case you want to ask any question to the speaker, you will have to send it to the email address that you find on the screen, info@aci-lac.io. The Q&A session will take place at the end of the presentation. So I would like to give the floor to Michael Obermeyer.
Thank you very much, Carla, and also a very warm welcome from my side. Carla introduced myself already a little bit. I will just add a couple of words to that. I am with Munich Airports for almost 7 years now, and I've been in the fields of decarbonization and energy management mainly. Next, please. Munich Airport is heavily engaged with ACI, and therefore it has been taking a leadership role in representing and forming the aviation industry. The Munich Airport CEOs, Michael Kerglow, as a former and longtime CEO, and now Joost Lammers, have had and have major roles within ACI World and ACI Europe. Just the same goes for our managing director, Lorenzo Di Loreto, who is a member of the ACI Latin America Caribbean Board of Directors. And I'm also recently appointed as a new member to the ACI Europe Environmental Strategy Committee. Munich Airport is an airport member for ACI and also a world business partner to all regions of ACI. But that's that on our engagement with ACI. And next slide, please. First of all, before we go into the topic of decarbonization, I just want to give you a brief overview of what sustainability is. Next, please. For the public, sustainability is currently on the edge between rising awareness, acceptance, and need for action. Many of you may have heard of Fridays for Future. Their worldwide actions have found many followers and supporters. And due to recent events, the picture of sustainability can take severe damage. In Germany, the so-called last generation, such as Extinction Rebellion, which is operating in Great Britain, are blocking streets, runways, are climbing planes, soiling paintings, and throwing cakes on representatives of the automotive and aviation industry. Those kinds of protests are representing a nuisance for people who just want to go to work in the morning or catch a flight. Actions like those can massively damage the picture of sustainability and its acceptance in the public. Next, please. On a business side, it also looks very similar. In recent years, there have been many regulations arising all over the world. Since 1972, there was an 38-fold increase in sustainability related regulation. And because of those regulations, it's becoming a major headache for companies because they have to incorporate all those regulations, but also it's rising awareness for businesses and credit rating agencies, banks, and so on. Therefore, it's becoming a major part of company strategies, and it is also incorporated in corporate governance. Next, please. So what sustainability should actually look like? It should be easy to handle for businesses because the potential of sustainability is great. It starts with financial benefits. It goes on with increased customer satisfaction and also includes employee health and safety. The simple process of sustainability is to challenge the processes, how they are done as of now, then apply those improvements which would have been found, and after challenge again if it can be done any different or any even better. But to come to the topic of decarbonization, the ACI is providing a great guideline for airports with its ACA program. It's simple and it is a step-for-step program and approach for airports on, first of all, how to build a carbon footprint, then in higher levels, how to start first decarbonization actions, how to approach stakeholders, and yes, with the different levels that can be taken step by step, it's not that overwhelming for first-time appliers because there's not too much of knowledge required prior to the process. Next, please. So, as I just said, the first step of decarbonization is always knowing your CO2 inventory. And therefore, you have to build a footprint which is based on your energy demand. Next, please. But first of all, I want to give you a look at Munich Airport and its long story of sustainability and especially decarbonization. It all started back in 2005 when Munich Airport committed to CO2 neutral growth. Therefore, it implemented a team that was dedicated full-time to work in energy management. In 2010, Munich Airport was one of the first airports which is ACA level 3 certified. It is certified throughout all these years up to now. And in 2016, Munich Airport committed to operate CO2 neutral by 2030. In 2019, Munich Airport was one of the first airports that committed to the shared goal of aviation to reach net zero by 2050. And because though this strategy is pretty outdated according to industry standards and industry top level, there will be a revised sustainability strategy published very soon. Next, please. Munich Airport's passenger numbers have been rising by 68% from 2005. That means Munich Airport in 2005 had 28.6 million passengers, and at its peak operation in 2019, the airport served 48 million passengers. There was an increase in gross floor area covered by new buildings of 442,000 square meters since that day. And also in 2005, the Terminal 2 was already opened. Obviously, Munich Airport suffered a lot, like every other airport in the world, due to the corona pandemic, and passenger numbers dropped rapidly. Next, please. But as you can see, previous, please. Thank you. As you can see, since 2005, Munich Airport managed to not increase its CO2 emissions under the period under consideration. That's a very contrasting development compared to the number of passengers between 2005 and 2019. Obviously, you can see in the years 2020 and 21 a small differing number or a smaller number of CO2 emissions due to the corona pandemic. But as you all know, the infrastructure has to be in operation, even though it's serving only a fragment of its original capacity. Next, please. Energy management, therefore, is mandatory to ensure constant and decreasing energy demand, even if the airport is growing, and especially if the airport is growing. Decreasing energy demand does not only lead to lower emissions, but also to decreasing operational cost in any case. And to continue this development and also to follow the new goals of CO2 neutrality by 2030, Munich Airport developed this trajectory to reach carbon neutrality by 2030. For this future development of energy efficiency, decarbonization, and renewable energies, Munich Airport has dedicated 150 million euros to reach this ambitious goal. Next, please. But now I finally want to talk about what ACA is and how decarbonization works. To start, I want to explain the 3 different scopes of CO2 emissions according to the ACA program. Scope 1 emissions are those emissions directly caused through airport activities, like vehicles, de-icing substances, on-site waste and water management. Scope 2 emissions is caused by the airport through its energy purchases. Most of the airports worldwide are not generating their energy themselves, but buying electricity from the grid. Also, energy for heating can be bought from outside. And lastly, scope 3 emissions are emissions which are being caused by other companies who are operating at the airport. And for scope 3 emissions, there is a major difference between ACA levels 3 and 4. In ACA level 3, you're only reporting on the LTO cycle emissions of aircraft, and on level 4, you have to report on the full flight emissions from destination to arrival. Next, please. So how do you build scope 1 emissions? I will explain this on the example of Munich Airport. As I already mentioned, Munich Airport is only level 3 in the ACA program. In level 4, there are some additional resources and sources of CO2 included. For Munich Airport, one of the main emitters in scope 1 is its combined heat and power plant. It is providing electricity and heating to the airport, but it is using natural gas. Therefore, it has a lot of emissions. Also, the gas required for the natural gas boiler plant, and fuel and oil provided for emergency diesel gas sets is having a, sorry, I just lost my words. Also, the emergency generators are emitting gas, carbon dioxide. But not only the energy supply of Munich Airport is emitting carbon, it's also the car fleet of the airport and the treatment of de-icing fluids, which is actually done by our subsidiary EFM, but also those emissions of subsidiaries are included in scope 1 emissions. And data sources for the scope 1 build up are mainly bills and data from energy meters. All this combined accounted for 70,000 tons of CO2 at Munich Airport in 2021. Next, please. In scope 2, as I already mentioned, there's mainly energy purchased from outside. So the electricity purchased from the grid, if it's not green electricity, is adding emissions to scope 2, but also the purchase of natural gas for other processes, for example, is adding emissions to scope 2. But if those purchased electricity and gas or district heating emissions are provided to other companies, those emissions are getting deducted from Munich Airport's carbon footprint again. And since Munich Airport is mainly sourcing its energy itself, Scope 2 emissions only account for 5,250 tons of CO2. The data sources to build up the Scope 2 carbon footprint is also from bills and data from energy meters. Next, please. So for level 3, the carbon footprint is, as I already told you, the energy consumption and emissions caused by third parties at the airport. There's obviously, again, electricity, but also heat purchased by outside companies, cooling, and also natural gas provided to outside companies, and fuel, obviously. But then there's something more in Scope 3. For level 3, as I already mentioned, it is the landing and takeoff process. This includes idling, approach, takeoff, climb out, and taxiing of aircraft. But it also includes APU emissions. For level 4, it would just be full flight emissions, which can be calculated on basis of the fuel uplift at the airport, or based on fuel consumption based on the ICAO engine data sheets. The method with fuel uplifted at the airport is more inaccurate, since many airlines will refuel at your airport if fuel prices in your country are generally cheap, or if fuel prices are relatively high in your country, the fuel uplift will be relatively low. For Munich Airport, the Scope 3 emissions account for almost 200,000 tons of CO2. And data sources are obviously, again, bills and datas, but also calculations conducted through surveys for passengers on the transportation they are using to get to the airport, but also on stakeholder questionnaires on their energy consumption. Next, please. To sum up, the footprint of an airport, and especially in this case of Munich Airport, as I just told you, there's the 3 scopes of emissions. For Munich Airport, fuel, the combined heat and power plant, and also gas, diesel used for heating accounts for 26% of its emissions. For Scope 2 emissions, that's electricity purchased from the grid, only accounts for 2% of the emissions of Munich Airport. The largest share obviously have the stakeholders, because all the flight movements have to be taken into account: feeder traffic for passengers, but also employees, and obviously energy consumption of third parties. Next, please. On the upper orange line in the diagram, you can see the emissions per passenger in scopes 1, 2, and 3. This number has been reduced by approximately 32% over the last 15 years. And unfortunately, due to lower passenger numbers and the still ongoing operations of the airport, emissions per passenger have taken a massive rise in the COVID-plagued years 2020 and 2021. Same goes for scopes 1 and 2, obviously. There, the emissions were down to only 2.1 kilogram of CO2 in 2019, and that despite the opening of our brand new satellite terminal, for example, and other buildings which are related to aviation or non-aviation activities of Munich Airport. Next, please. But now the theoretical and maybe not so interesting part of the decarbonization is over, and we're coming to CO2 and energy efficiency measures, the actual part where decarbonization comes to play. Next, please. But you cannot do successful decarbonization without metering. As I've already mentioned, meter data is one of the foundations for the building of a carbon footprint, but it is even more crucial when it comes to decarbonization, because to successfully decarbonize, you have to know your energy consumption. You have to compare buildings, processes, and find inefficiencies like that. Therefore, Munich Airport has introduced a remote meter system which allows to remotely and on demand read about 1,500 billing relevant meters. Next, please. You all probably remember this graphic from the build-up process of the carbon footprint. But now I want to explain you, according to this graphic, how you can identify potentials to decarbonize your airport. For Munich Airport, the most obvious is probably the combined heat and power plant, which has also the largest share of Scope 1 emissions. And to reduce emissions from the combined heat and power plant, the combined heat and power plant can, for example, be upgraded and renewed. Or the combined heat and power plant could even be substituted with renewables. For electricity from renewable energy sources, options are, for example, sourcing electric energy from hydropower, photovoltaics, and wind turbines. But as you all might know, in Germany, winters are pretty cold, and the combined heat and power plant is also delivering heat to heat the buildings. Not just the electricity has to be substituted, but also the heating energy. This can, for example, be sourced from biomass, or geothermal energy could be used. And lastly, the use of heat pumps is an option. Obviously, this is only an option when the electricity comes from renewable sources, because if you're not using electricity from renewable sources, you're just leaving your carbon footprint with electricity. The second major point that can be addressed is the vehicle fleet. And there also upgrades to more efficient vehicles is an option. The usage of electric vehicles, or in the future, the usage of hydrogen-powered vehicles might be an option. Next, please. As you can see here on this slide, that's exactly what Munich Airport has done. It has built a new combined heat and power plant in the year 2015, combined with district heating from biogen sources and photovoltaic systems on 2 of its buildings, and the conversion of absorption chillers. Munich Airport was able to reduce its CO2 footprint for about 15,000 tons per year. Next, please. Also, Munich Airport has addressed its vehicle fleet. For pool vehicles, Munich Airport has purchased 105 cars, and it also purchased 268 electric ground serving equipment. Additionally, 32 buses with more efficient motors were purchased, and 24 cars powered by biogas are in use. Also, there's the usage of low carbon fuels in form of care diesel. These measures led to emission reductions of 3,000 tons per year. Next, please. Scope 2 emissions can also be reduced by purchases of energy sourced from renewables, for example, but also a switch to own power sourcing by building of photovoltaic plants might be considerable. And then there's obviously not only the purchase of renewables, but actually energy efficiency, which saves energy consumption from electricity an option. For example, the upgrade of chillers to a more energy efficient model is considerable, and also renewables of outdated consumers of electric energy, like old lighting systems which are not on LED basis, or parts of like the fans of HVAC systems, IT systems, and many others are an option. Next, please. Munich Airport also addressed all these issues within the last 15 years, and it was able to reduce its carbon footprint by 17,500 tons per year. As you can see on the photo on the left hand side, there's the old apron lighting system, almost yellowish, and then on the right side of the terminal you can see the new apron lighting system based on LED technology, which is more energy efficient, but it has also an intelligent lighting control system. You might not notice, but in the very back, there's an empty position and it gets darker on the empty positions. So the lights are switched off if positions are not used. Next, please. Through energy efficiencies addressing the HVAC ventilation and cooling system, for example, using of direct drive ventilator systems or multiple fan technology and lower air exchange rates, Munich Airport was able to reduce its carbon footprint for another 13,100 tons per year. Next, please. And lastly, there is the IT system, which can be addressed with energy saving PCs and monitors. But there's also other measures which addresses processes drawn from the past, like, for example, the ramp heating system of our parking garages. Back in 1992, some engineer thought the risk of the icing of parking garage ramps would be very high. So they built in heating systems to prevent icing of the ramps. This event never took place, so these systems were just dismantled, and those measures lead to another reduction of 3,000 tons per year. Next, please. And there's the overview of the effect of all those different measures which were taken until the year of 2021. Lighting accounted for 33.5% of reductions, vehicles for 6%, indoor air and ventilation for 25%, ICT systems for 1%, other measures for 4.5%, and the power generation and sourcing accounted for 30% of emission reductions. This sums up to a total amount of 52,000. Next, please. There's once again an overview of all the different measures Munich Airport has taken over the past years. On the top left, you can see Munich Airport's power plant. On the bottom left, the APU system, for example, and on the bottom right, you can see the satellite building, which is another perfect example of decarbonization, but I will go more into detail on that on the next slide. Next, please. For the building of the satellite terminal, very ambitious goals were set. The target was that the satellite should be emitting 40% less CO2 than the passenger area of Terminal 2. Those targets were over-exceeded by the engineers and architects and resulted in almost 52% of savings. Those values were measured in 2017 and re-measuring in 2019 confirmed these data. Next, please. There's once again an image of Munich Airport's carbon neutral goal. Its target is to decarbonize 60% of its own footprint by reduction measures, and only 40% can be addressed through compensation. Next, please. And here you can see again the fields of actions like power generation and power sourcing, but also for airport-specific facilities, the airport lighting system, the baggage handling system, upgrades of passenger boarding bridges, the vehicle park with its fuel utilization. For example, Munich Airport also introduced a no idling policy for itself and its stakeholders. And then there's obviously building services with terminal buildings, office buildings, and infrastructural additions who have to fulfill very strict goals in relation to energy consumption and CO2 footprint. Next, please. Therefore, Munich Airport has spent more than €500,000 even in 2021. And since 2017, Munich Airport has spent 8.2 million for decarbonization. There's expenditure of €3 million planned for further CO2 reduction measures, and also subsides of 1.55 million were taken in account for the pandemic compliant conversion of HVAC systems. The investment volume raised up to €11.08 million until 2021. Next, please. And this is how those measures successfully unfolded. As you can see, there's a huge increase in carbon emission reductions until 2010. Then the curve flattened a little until 2016. And from 2016 to 2017, there is a massive increase in emission reductions. This is due to Munich Airport's strategy and those 150 million which were allocated to decarbonization and enabled a lot of measures our engineers already had in their mind, but were not approved until then. Next, please. Now I will just present you a few more examples for offsetting measures, and then I will be happy to receive and answer all your questions. Next, please. As I've already said, the Scope 3 emissions are caused by third parties at the airport. Therefore, all measures which have been taken at Munich Airport for Scopes 1 and 2 can be applied for stakeholders too, but those will have to be applied by stakeholders themselves, obviously, and the airport can only guide and influence the stakeholders on these. But it can also address emissions from its air traffic, for example, by stricter APU regulation. Munich Airport, for example, is including the usage of preconditioned air devices in its landing fees. So you pay the use of preconditioned air whether you're using it or not. If you're not using it, you pay double the use of the PCA and the kerosene for your auxiliary power unit. But also, for example, the use of lower emission aircraft can be incentivized with adoption of the landing fees. Next, please. On this graphic, you can see the usage of preconditioned air devices by airline at Munich Airport. On the bottom right-hand side, you can see all those airlines who are not frequently using the preconditioned air devices. On the upper left-hand side, you can see the best airlines in usage of preconditioned air. Next, please. But Munich Airport also developed a concept of, or not developed, it introduced successfully with a restaurant the concept of evaporate cooling to cool the rooms of the restaurant. So in this concept, the supply air is not cooled with cold water, but by removing the thermal energy required for the evaporation of the water. The solar absorbers are required to boil out the salt solution. And as I already told you, this system cools a cafeteria or restaurant with approximately 400 square feet. And the system does not require any additional heating or cooling energy. Next, please. To summarize all of what I've said is Munich Airport's emissions in 2005 were at 112,000 tons. And despite the construction of several new buildings, apron surfaces, and the constant growth in passenger numbers, the emissions in 2019 were down to 101,000 tons of CO2. The major emission source for Munich Airport is its combined heat and power plant, which accounts for almost 65% of Munich Airport Scope 1 and 2 emissions. And other major emission reductor at most airports are lighting, HVAC systems, and the power sourcing. So what do you need to achieve all this? That does not only save energy, but also money. The foundation for these successes can be laid in a approximately 50-person day project. But to maintain the course decarbonization, of successful decarbonization, the implementation of the measures must be followed up on the long term. And as I've already told you, Munich Airport so far invested slightly above 10 million euros for decarbonization, but the return on invest of those decarbonization measures is at 3.8 years. So most of the measures taken since 2016 are all already making the airport some money. Next, please. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to answer all your questions.
Thank you, Michael. I just want to do a quick reminder. If you have any questions, please send it to info@aci-lac.io. And we have one question here that says, why is decarbonization important to your organization?
It's important because Munich Airport is aware of the threat global warming is having on our planet, or is to our planet. And it also is important because, as I've already mentioned, it does not only do good for the planet, but it also saves the company actual spendings on operational cost.
Okay, thank you, Michael. I have another one here. We have a few more minutes. Who are your stakeholders and do they care about decarbonization?
Our main stakeholders are obviously airlines like Lufthansa and its Star Alliance partners, but also airlines like Emirates, Qatar, and cargo companies, ground handling companies like Swissport, and especially the Star Alliance airlines care a lot about decarbonization, but also the other stakeholders are willing to reduce their energy consumption and also their carbon footprint.
Great, thank you. I think we have another one here.
Sure.
It says, what is the difference between carbon neutrality and net zero?
The difference between carbon neutrality and net zero is that carbon neutrality means your emissions are just offset. You can buy certificates for for your emissions. In net zero, all your emissions have to be zero. And for emissions that cannot be zero at the moment, measures have to be taken to remove the CO2 from the atmosphere.
Okay, let me see if I have any other question here. Here it says, airlines emissions are taken into account until 3000 FF in the ACI accreditation program. How do you address these emissions as you have no influence on flight operations?
Those emissions are very hard to be addressed by the airports. Munich Airport is addressing those emissions, obviously not for the LTO cycle, but for the usage of APU by the provision of preconditioned air devices, but also Munich Airport is not charging any throughput fees for SAF. So the usage of the airport's fueling system is for free if the airlines are using SAF.
Okay, we have another question. It says, which should be the first step to lead to decarbonization?
The first step should clearly be to build the actual carbon footprint. And I just want to address the second step is to look in your building equipment where techniques are used which are not up to the highest industry standards and latest industry standards.
Okay, I think we have a few minutes. Here it says, in the US, stakeholders are not as educated as our European and South American airports. How can we educate them?
The education of stakeholders can be done by meetings to sensitize them, telling them about the importance of of emission reductions for the airport and also for our planet. But they can also be guided on decarbonization by, for example, incentivizing lower emission airplanes or the usage of preconditioned air systems, and that's only a last resort. For example, vehicle idling can be penalized.
Okay, we have more questions, but I think we are running out of time. So I want to wrap up and say thank you to Michael for sharing with us this valuable information, and to all of you that are here connected, participating. In case you have any more questions, please send it to us in the email, and we will follow up with Michael later and send it back to you. So have a great day and see you on the next webinar.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.